Hey everyone, want to provide a deck tech for my Riptide deck. I was able to top 8 both the Battle Hardened as the first seed on this 80 cards and top 8 the LL ProQuest Plus the next day on the same 80 cards. Um, I obviously did not expect my results to be this good, but there's kind of been a call to get a deck tech out there about what I'm doing and why it seemed to work this weekend, and so I figured I'd put this video together. So the first question I wanted to answer was, why am I currently playing Riptide? Um, I do enjoy playing Ranger, and it's one of the classes that I do play, and currently I feel that Riptide, or I guess pre-bans, I felt that Riptide was in a very, very good position for the meta. Riptide has plus plus win rates into all assassins, ninjas, and warriors. Um, by plus plus, I mean 75% plus into all heroes of those classes. And it also, I had tech to try to have a reasonable Gravy Bones matchup, which I felt I did have. And decks that historically have kept Riptide out of the meta, like Guardian or Earth, weren't really a big part of what was happening. Obviously, bans have shaken this up. Gravy Bones is out of the meta for at least this week. Who knows what's going to happen in the next few weeks? Assassin, Ninja, Warrior still appear to be around, but Earth is back in a big way. And so we'll talk about how my deck played into that over this weekend. I wanted to. A lot of the conversation around my deck, which I'll get into later, is the fact that I beat 3 Florians this weekend, which is a matchup which historically Riptide has insta-lost. Um, and to illustrate that, I wanted to help those who maybe are new to the hero, help explain like why Riptide does have some tools to be able to work around some of these decks. Um, to I guess I wanted to talk about Riptide. A lot of people often consider the trap part of his hero ability to be what makes him special. Um, and I do play lots of traps. I do think traps are an important part of the deck. But really, a lot of Riptide's power comes from the first part of his hero ability. So whenever you play a card from hand, you may put a card from your hand face down into your arsenal. I wanted to. I'm going to play a section of a video from the New Horizons YouTube channel that outlines how you can play Riptide and use your Riptide triggers to subvert certain things, such as Face Purgatory, or to withhold information to gain points in certain matchups, even if you're playing the same cards. These 4 cards shown on screen, I had this exact hand probably 20 times this weekend. So I'm going to hop out of presenter mode. I'm going to hop over here and I'm just going to play this video for you all.
These cards. So we were wanting to maximize our value and distribute our on hits correctly, so that you can hide info but also have as much breakpoints as possible. So sometimes it's worth just throwing all your buffs out there, putting that card in arsenal, and then throwing the Ravel, making sure that you get this to apply the on hit, but hyper buff this arrow. They don't know what this is, but they know that these are coming. Now this does reveal information, but you do get 2 instances of potential premeditate. Now in certain decks where, say, they have like Rampart and it's Guardian, where you don't want to break the chain, then you end up trying to do that. But in any other decks where you don't really care if the chain gets broken, you play like this, and then try to hide information so that now this comes in for 10. So you're coming in for 14 here, but now they didn't know about the on hits on these. So you distribute your on hits to punish not blocking, because you have the ponder so you don't care, but now they may need a block because of the other effect. Now, this changes a lot. And in some cases, say whenever they have a flush bag, then you wanting to do this as well because you want to play this, put that in arsenal, and empty your hand completely, full damage, and they cannot get scowling off. So you got to make sure that you are aware of things like that, or the new one for Runeblade.
Sorry. The New Horizons channel specifically calls out Face Purgatory here, and this card is beyond broken. And but if you use Riptide effectively to play out your hand in such a manner that you never have anything in your hand while a 7 power attack is presented to them, then you make it very difficult for Florian to unlock that broken value in Face Purgatory. Um, and the value of their Face Purgatory block is one of the things that defines the matchup generally. And something to keep in mind. I think this sequence that was shown here, like I said, I had this exact hand so many times this weekend, and understanding what the most optimal way is to play around each hand is how you get value where you wouldn't otherwise see it, or other decks wouldn't otherwise have access to it. I'm going to put a link to this video and the realistically, I would recommend watching the entire video if you're new to Riptide, and they have actually an entire series here that you can watch that I've watched, and I think does a really good job of explaining how to play Riptide at the most optimal level. All right, back to my presentation. So now that we kind of understand the core of how to play Riptide's hands and some of the ideas that you can try to implement to kind of subvert, what Florian might be doing, or what any hero realistically might be doing in the game, let's talk about some of how I built my deck. So one question that you might start to ask yourself is to pitch or not to pitch. Historically, the most powerful cards that Ranger has had access to, and that really any hero in the game has had access to, are some of these cards that I picture up on the screen here. The effects of these cards are incredibly powerful, and the Ranger class has been defined by cards like this, since they've been released. However, we're at kind of a tough place for the Ranger class because the engine that has run these cards for the longest time, which is Death Dealer, is banned. A yellow pitch deck, there's not a equivalent to Death Dealer that you can slot in to make, to fill the void that Death Dealer left. And this posed a big problem for Riptide because Riptide was really just playing as a, tempo-based Azalea list for a long time with Death Dealer. And after Death Dealer was gone, it was unclear what direction he might have moving forward. However, there's some new cards that came out with High Seas that give Riptide a new vision for how he can play the game and find his own niche on how to be successful. And that's these 3 cards that I picture on screen. Swift Shot and Dry Powder Shot are relatively unassuming. But when you take a look at the Ranger card pool and the generic card pool, prior to these 2 cards being released, there was not enough cards to put in the deck to make an aggro, Cheerio list for Riptide. And these cards, while they don't do anything outlandish on paper, you know, allow this deck to be possible. And so the answer to my question is you never pitch. You always play 0 for 4s with Go Again or 0 for 4 with On Hit. Um, and that's how you should be playing Riptide now and probably until they ban something or the hero LLs, however many years that takes from now. Um, but wait a second. Wait, did we skipped over? Did we read this card? Look at what this card does. It says, when this defends, you may banish an arrow from your hand. It blocks for 4, and if you do, at the start of your turn, put a face up in your arsenal, and it gets +3 until end of turn. This card is beyond busted, and when this card was released, I think many people saw the power that this card could hold. Especially when you consider that paired with Dry Powder Shot, paired with Searing Shot, paired with Drill Shot, this is a 2-card 12 with minimal setup. And I started to ask myself, what can I be doing differently to abuse what I see is the most powerful part, that the most powerful thing that Riptide can be doing nowadays? And so I asked myself, is New Horizons actually the correct headpiece to be playing in Ranger? I think the answer is no. Crown of Providence allows you to, 1, avoid arsenal disruption, improve your ability to be a robust defensive deck, and 3, punish your opposing players into the ground when they try to swing tempo back and you have a return fire in hand, and you can use Crown to bottom your arsenal that you may have gotten off a Ponder token to stay card neutral and continue the beatdown. Crown offers so much for what Riptide wants to be doing, and what I view Riptide as wanting to be doing is keeping off Arsenal as much as possible, except for those cases where you may be drawing off Ponder or arsenaling a trap. And Crown is that get out of jail free card to continue to abuse the value of return fire. Next comment I wanted to address. No one actually said this weekend, but I got many jokes about the fact that I played Redliner, which I think may be the first time that bow has ever been registered at a battle hardened. I'm not sure. Maybe we'll have to look into that. And truth is, it's the same bow. It's the same bow as Manta. There's not really any difference to them once you realize that Crown is the better headpiece. The reason I ended up playing Redliner, 1, it's funny because no one knows what it does. 2, I was playing an Armory earlier in the week, and I noticed that I kept forgetting to untap my Manta at the end of turns. And now I know everyone's, generally people are pretty friendly at Flesh and Blood events, but people could potentially call me on that and try to kind of shark me out of using my bow, I was afraid. And I worried that although my deck is busted, if I don't have access to my bow, maybe my deck is not that busted. And at the time, I didn't have a judge to ask about this question, so I took a look at Redliner. I realized it was the same thing. I put it in my list. Now, if you're shaking in your boots wondering, oh my gosh, this guy's right. I can't be playing Manta. This sucks. I talked to some judges over the weekend, and they assured me that my concern was not valid, that an untap of a bow is actually a game state. It's like a mandatory game state trigger. I shouldn't even say trigger. It's just a mandatory piece of the game state. So if you do notice it on your following turn and your opponent tries to call you on it, in general, judges should be okay with just doing a minor game correction and untapping the bow for you. I thought I would do some event recaps. Not necessarily to go in detail on each game, but to show how well the deck was performing on the day. And even though I didn't really play my best matchups the entirety of the day, and I'll get into matchups a little bit later. So by the time I had locked first seed, I had not gotten below 7 HP, and um, every game was really just a dominant victory through game 7. Um, I would say, um, yeah, I mean the deck just performed very well. We can talk a little bit more about the Florian matchup in specific in a little bit. I do think it's an unfavored matchup. I do think I high rolled a little bit on the weekend, but I do think there is a solid game plan that, if you enact correctly, um, can lead you to a reasonable result into that hero. And that's the best you can do. Stick to your game plan, play, clean flesh and blood, and you'll often find that you can come out with a victory, regardless of the matchup. You know what the matchup numbers say you should be able to do. I'll talk about my 2 losses in specific. Game 8, I actually won the die roll against Cecilio. I had gone first against Cecilio in game 3. I had maybe a half dozen games into Cecilio prior to this weekend. I wasn't certain on how much better or worse first or second would be. I chose to go second in game 8 just to see what would happen, and I was punished for that. You definitely want to be going first against Cecilio, similar to Dio. Don't let them set up for free. They have lots of non-blocks in their hand. Make sure that you're, if able to, go first, and try to make them pay for setting up their board state if they draw a hand of no blocks. My top 8 game, I played against another Florian. My Florian opponent played very well. He was friends with the Florian that I had played in game 4. And so this Florian, had a well-prepared game plan. He only brought in 3 D-Reacts into me. I did play Dreadbore. I was up on tempo in enacting my game plan the way I wanted to. And unfortunately, I had a full pump hand about 7 or 8 turns in. At the time, I was uncomfortable with using my crown to cash in and hunt for a card off the top of my deck. In hindsight, that card ended up being an E-Strike. I did have a Premeditate in hand. I could have just blocked for 2 and then E-Striked for 10 with Premeditate had I crowned. But instead, I blocked out and figured that maybe Florian can't really gather much tempo with a full hand. I think he had a decent hand with that next hand, and it was enough after my foot, I had kind of taken my foot off the gas pedal that the game started to fall apart. And notably, we talked about the Face Purgatory trigger being so critical to the matchup. I had been able to play extremely well, I think, with my Riptide, triggers throughout the game, that there was never really a good opportunity for him to face Purgatory. And so while we were both at 5, I had what I assumed to be a killer hand that I was going to draw up. He had blocked an Endless Arrow for 8 and thought for a moment and decided to overblock it with his Face Purgatory. Not because I had any cards left in hand, but for him to draw 1 additional card. Unfortunately, that 1 card that he drew was a Bramble Spark, and the Bramble Spark was able to be paired with a Felling while I was at 5. My hand was the perfect hand to clap back if it was any other card. I had the Return Fire, I had the Premeditate, I had the Dry Powder Shot. I still had the Crown of Providence on board. But unfortunately, with the extra 4 damage from Bramble Spark, there was no hope, and the game fell from there. But I think it was a very close game, and I think I proved to myself that the Florian matchup is not that bad. I don't know if it's good, but it's not bad. And so that's something to keep in mind, and I'll talk about the sideboard a little bit here in a second. Living Legend, I think it's kind of funny that I decided to play the same 80. I was going to play Riptide, but I tested a bunch of games earlier in the week, and I couldn't beat anything with it. Um, and so I just decided, hey, I did so well yesterday with my deck. Let's just run it back. My thought was that maybe Riptide with Return Fire and Death Dealer could have merit into some of the um, LL decks. But maybe let's try my 80 and see how far away I am from being able to beat these Living Legend decks that everyone says are busted. And then I'll know like how much I need to brew to make Death Dealer Riptide work. Um, and I think I got a lot of good pairings. And I don't think that CC Riptide should be winning any LL events. I do think that Acilio is just as winnable in Living Legend as it is in CC. I do think Briar, while Briar is busted, historically, like, it does a lot of things that Riptide wants people to be doing into him, which is relying on huge buffs to their attacks and on hits on attacks with Go Again to generate absurd value. And Tar Pit Trap, Buzzsaw Trap, Collapsing Trap destroyed that plan. And that's how I won those games. Ira is probably the only matchup that I feel like Riptide should win. So if there are bans to Briar and Ira does pick up steam in LL, then I think Riptide, hey, maybe it's got some legs. I lost 2 games into Dio. Both I lost the die roll, so pretty much a lose in those games, especially with what that deck can do in LL. Game 7, I didn't put it here, but I lost to Brody. He was on Chain, and Chain's definitely a better LL deck than Riptide. We'll just say that. But that's about all there is to it. All right, matchup breakdown and sideboard guide. All right, so a question you probably all are asking is, okay, this guy just had these great results on Riptide. He's probably going to just be way too overly optimistic about my matchup after the events. And I'll say no. I'm going to be totally, straight with you guys. You win every matchup, no matter the format. I don't think I'm ever going to lose a game again. End of video. No, not quite. Not quite. Riptide does actually have a decent mix of matchups and some horrendously bad matchups that are pretty much worth conceding. And so I'm going to include a link to a deck tech spreadsheet in this video that you can use to get my take on what matchups are good and what matchups are bad, and also a sideboarding guide on what cards you should be playing in which matchup. I've also updated my deck list, which I'll include in the description of the video, which I think now accurately represents which cards I consider to be sideboard cards. Previously, I think I had included these cards as main board and sharpshooters as main board. So if you're looking at it today compared to this weekend, that's a change you'll notice. So NCC, I included the Riptide win rates against each of these decks on Talishar, just to kind of call out that, like, I think some of these win rates, like, you can see some of what I was seeing when I thought that Riptide was a good deck. And some of the matchups, I'm not quite sure what's happening on Talishar, such as Syndra. Apparently Riptides are losing the matchup. Based on my games with the Battle Hardened and about 15 other Syndra games I've played, regardless of whether you win or lose the die roll, you should be winning the matchup by 10 to 15 points. It's really hard for Syndra. And Yeah, but for the most part, you can see, he does well into Slippy, he does well into Fang, he does well into Ira, um, and these are, decks that people are playing in the current meta, and that's valuable. Um, some, I guess I'll talk about some of the key decks that I think you may be thinking or wondering about. Slippy, he sits at a 54% win rate on Talishar. Um, my take is that Slippy, especially after the Bonds ban, is pretty much a non-game. You have Tar Pit Trap, which when you play a Tar Pit Trap on their 3 go again stealth attack, their entire hand just completely falls apart. They're like the deck just crumbles. And you get to do that 3 times a game, and you have so many other traps. You have Blood Rot traps that are just punishing them every time they react. Spike Pit Trap. You have Collapsing Trap, Buzzsaw Trap, Frailty Traps. Um, it's very hopeless for Slippy. Mario, I don't think he's going to be as much of a presence in the meta now that Slippy has fallen, but I think he maybe has more tools um, than Slippy does. I've never lost these matchups, but I do think that Mario. My take on the matchup here is like if I'm playing a battle hardened you know level player. Um, I think that Mario could have some tools, especially with the fact that they're go against on hit um, when I marked that could cause me problems. So um, yeah, but so hypothetically, I perceive that Mario could beat me. Hypothetically, I perceive that I guess it has been theorized that I think Slippy he does have all 3 blocks. Historically, it's been a problem for Riptide that he can be fatigued by decks full of 3 blocks. Slippies could maybe try to get a little smart. They could throw a bunch of D-reacts in their deck and try to catch you by surprise and fatigue you. Um, that could be something you're aware of. It could become true if they try to go into that tech that it just makes sense for us to be playing Dreadbore. And even if they aren't playing, even if they don't put D-reacts in and you're on Dreadbore, the matchup is so favored, I don't think it matters. Um, so that is something that we'll have to watch, especially as this deck, my Riptide deck, might get some notoriety with this list. Um, Something to pay attention to. Other decks, Fang is also a non-game. Brody was in the top 8 on his Fang list. I really did want to test my theory about Fang into his list. I do feel that Fang is a very, very big part of this meta, and it will continue to be so as long as Florian and Gravy are around. And I don't think it's losable for Riptide. And we're talking 3 matchups, the core decks that have been fighting Gravy for a while now, have, as soon as you sit down, regardless of the die roll, regardless of their sideboarding decisions or anything they've done in deck building, you have certainty that you're going to win. And that is like a huge component of this deck is just in the confidence that you can have going into these events when you have that kind of power into these other powerful heroes. Um, Ira is pretty much the same. I'll talk about some of the other matchups which may be a little bit less favorable. Florian, I put in the 40 to 60% win rate matchup. I think he may be closer to 40%, whereas I view the Verdance matchup as closer to 60%. Um, Florian has Reaping Blade, and he has an endgame where he can present enough damage at the end to win. Verdance blocks worse. If it wants to block better, it has to put D-reacts in. If it wants to survive, it has to block with its powerful attacks. It fatigues itself. I didn't get a chance to play in any Verdances this weekend, but I would have felt confident in those matchups, whereas I felt on the back foot against Florian. Other matchups you might see, Acilio, if you get to go first. Dio, if you get to go first. I think they're very favored. Dio I found to be a little bit more favored because your traps are very effective against Dio, whereas they're not against Cecilio. But these matchups are very swingy based on who gets to go first. So those are matchups that you might see. Let me think if there's anything else of note that I think we should talk about here. I think this also can, you can think about the fact that Riptide's window may close quickly. The next set expects to feature Guardian somewhat heavily, and we did just get some Guardian support that makes Valda a somewhat reasonable hero. Guardian is still unwinnable, and I don't think that there's a build of Riptide that can beat it. The Ranger class just does not have the tools to beat Guardian, and sometimes hey, maybe you can win a game, but it's pretty hopeless. I'll talk about the Florian sideboard specifically because I think it's really important to be siding correctly into Florian. You want to take out your traps, Frailty and Tarpit. You want to put in Release the Tension and Lace with Inertia. Idea is if they even have to keep in 60 reacts, your release effects, your Lace with Inertia, and your Seek and Destroy effects are going to line up with their D-reacts at certain points of the game, and they're going to lose value. If they're down to 3 D-reacts, I almost considered putting Maybe on Dreadbore. My top 8 opponent, he knew what I was going to be trying to do. He knew I was going to play Dreadbore. I think there's an argument to when like your opponent knows what you're doing, to play a mind game with them, and bring Manta or Redliner in, and that might be the way to to kind of mind game your way into making them play more D-reacts. But I would need to test more to see if, let's say, if Florian plays 0 D-reacts, can you actually beat him with Redliner? I'm not sure. Dreadbore is helpful when you want to be going pedal to the metal and you have dud cards in your hand, to just pitch them away for 1 more damage. I also put Maybe here for Enchanted Quiver. I didn't play Enchanted Quiver in the matchups, but I never felt like the game got even close to fatigue, so I think Enchanted Quiver would give you 1 more point of value. I don't know if you present Enchanted Quiver, if that makes the Florian play differently in such a way that you could be fatigued. But that would be something that's worth testing, because 1 point of value would have been very helpful in all of my games today, or this weekend. Yeah, I think that's about all there is to mention in this for now. The last thing I'll say is potential deck improvements. There were some comments about arrow density. As I said, I lost my top 8 game due to a full pump hand. So a question or a potential improvement. We could maybe fit 2 more arrows into the board. What to cut, what to put in, I'm not sure. There's not many options. Murkmire Grapnel may be the best option. It has play into Prism, which is why Battlefront Bastion's there. It has play into Florian, maybe, if he's on Seeds. Beyond that, if you go look at the options, there's not many, and they're not great. So, open to what you guys test out, and let me know what you see. Spike Pit Trap, I think I lost 2 points of value on the weekend by playing Spike Pit Trap over a 3rd Blood Rot. Blood Rot is 6 value. Spike Pit Trap is always 5 value, but conditionally could be 6 or even more. But I think in the matchups where you're playing reaction traps, the games aren't going long enough to the point where Spike Pit Trap is generating more than Blood Rot. So this would be the other improvement. Other than that, I feel like there's not many other cards available in the Ranger card pool to play in this deck. So if you guys have any other wacky ideas, I'm always open to hear them. But for now, I think these are the only improvements that I would be considering testing around. So thank you for watching, and I hope you guys have a great week.